My dear friends, in this video I will show you a game that I played quite recently at the German Bundesliga. And this game was very, I think, important for a certain line in the French defense. So I was playing white, playing against Linus Johansson. And I played maybe for almost the first time in my life the advanced variation in the French. I have been analyzing it a lot recently, and there are quite a number of new interesting developments which I would like to share with you. My opponent played one of the most central lines. I played bishop e2. Of course, there are other moves, but I was mainly attracted to this line because of the following. Takes, knight h6. This is a very central way to play with black. And now white has several ways to sacrifice some material. This is one of them. Knight d2, gh. This is a very forcing development. And with white, I'm usually attracted to this very forcing things where I try to find some new ideas. And here I played castles. This is not new. This is in fact a very critical opening position. Black has a variety of ways to play this position, but taking the pawn, for instance, is dangerous for black. So after rook b1, takes, then queen a3 is supposed to be more or less the only move, and this leads by force to something like this. White is threatening knight b5, so a6 is more or less forced, and rook fd1, amongst other moves. Also rook fc1 is quite possible, but rook fd1 in many lines does support the knight on d4, and also sometimes the rook is ready to go to d3, and this knight very often finds its way to h5. So this, despite black being 2 pawns up, is supposed to be very dangerous for black, I think with good reason. And my opponent played instead bishop d7. This, I think, a very solid, very central move, giving white an interesting choice. I still hesitated over the board. My brief preparation before the game said knight b3, but I didn't know about the following line, rook b1, and rook takes b7, and this pretty much by force leads to an endgame, which looks on surface quite good for white. So this is more or less forced, and the best play for both sides leads to this position. So rook a6 is very important. White is attacking this bishop, and this forces black to concede his coordination a bit. And now after black castles rook b7, black has to part with his two bishops. So this is of course very important, and also looks very attractive for white, because black's kingside is ruined. And after bishop d2, knight d2, like my intuition, my like first visual evaluation of the position both tell me that white should be better here. But the reality of it is not at all that simple. It seems that black is actually in time to get counterplay against the white's pawn on d4, and various moves here are possible. For instance, bishop e2 I quite like myself, and I think bishop a6 also is quite playable for black. Black prevents this knight from entering the kingside, and is also getting ready for counterplay against this pawn on d4. And sometimes this bishop on e2 can also be quite useful in playing bishop d1. And preventing the white knight on b3 from defending the pawn on d4 nicely. So this is a pretty complicated endgame, but I did know that despite the looks, it was quite playable for black. And for this game I prepared another sharper way to play with white, knight b3. This is by far less forcing, by far less theoretical, I think. But there has been quite some attention to this move in the last few months, so I think the following research will be going in this direction. Black goes rook c8. This is important, and it's very important also to know that after a3, this move is something of a trap, forces black to know the only reply knight d8, but knight d8 actually leads to a very good position with black. So something of a slightly trappy line, but black has to know it, and I think by now everybody does. So I played knight e1. Knight e1 is quite a big part of white's play here. The knight is aiming to go to d3 in a lot of lines, and also the black queen is in some trouble now. Other than that, white is opening up the path for the pawn on f2, and also sometimes the bishop can go to h5. So quite a multi-purpose move. Black plays knight b4. This is very important also. As we have seen before, opening of this diagonal is sometimes important for black, and also controlling some squares. The rook comes into play. So everything is quite logical, and a very difficult position to understand, and as I found it out, to play. When you analyze it with a computer, before or afterwards, computer suggests a lot of options for both sides, but over the board, none of them, they look simple. For instance, when preparing for the game, I did see rook b1, but over the board, it really didn't look very clear to me. So analyzing afterwards, I think queen a3 is very simple for black. This line, the computer initially likes white, but didn't look clear to me. And also over the board, I just didn't see what white was doing. And even a different line with queen takes a2. The computer hates it for black at first, but in fact, it all hinges on quite an incredible tactical resource, bishop h5 here, with an idea to play for mate after rook a8 and queen g4. And unless you really know this very well with white, it's very difficult to come up, I think, with this sort of geometry. And even if you do, this line after rook takes b3, this is important. And then queen c1, I have analyzed, it's a very long, very straight computer variation, which at the end of it actually seems drawn. So sometimes, you know, this preparing this sort of lines with the computer can be quite tricky, because we're not actually capable of finding all the variations to justify certain recommendations over the board. And when I actually got this position, I just sort of decided to look at the board, at the position myself, and came up with bishop h5, which looked like a very logical way to play, threatening queen f3, and also preparing maybe f4 and eyeing the pawn on f7, given that the black king is on e8, didn't seem stupid to me. So bishop h5 turned out to be an all right move. Basically from here on, I think we were both entirely on our own. My opponent played rook g8, quite a logical continuation. He intends to pose some problems for my pawn on g2 in the future, and also is getting ready to play rook g7 to cover this pawn on f7 quite nicely. Black does, of course, have other continuations, but they're all of them quite complex. For instance, b6 is a very interesting approach, just limiting this knight on b3 for good. And after queen f3, just bishop e7, just abandoning this pawn on f7, but bringing the king into safety and developing quite nicely. So this is one very possible approach. Another move instead of rook g8 could be rook c3. The rook on c3 is actually very often quite annoying for white, controls a lot of good squares. And here white has this reasonably forcing continuation, which after another slightly computerized variation leads to a draw by perpetual check. So all of this, of course, is very difficult to find over the board. So we get this sort of very difficult, a very complex fight. Well, of course, some mistakes are difficult to avoid. My opponent played rook g8, f4. This looked logical to me, preparing rook f2, and also sometimes preparing f5. And black played rook g7. Also here, of course, some other moves were possible. For instance, rook c3, rook f2, queen a3. And here there are various ways to play with white. For instance, knight c2 is quite interesting, or also king h1. Maybe I can prepare the pawn storm on the king side. All in all, it seems that whatever either one of us does, the position will remain very complex, very difficult to play for both sides. So he played rook g7, and here I spent quite a long time with white, and a curious thing happened to me. I did, after my lengthy thought, decide that rook f3 was the strongest move, and it seems that this was a correct decision, and yet I did not play it because it just it felt not sufficiently concrete, felt difficult to control. Like for instance, after rook c4, a3, knight c6, something like this. It felt like maybe it would be difficult to show the precision necessary. Something like this is probably good for white, but it's still very difficult to prove it. And at the end of the day, I just played rook f2 instead, because it just felt a bit simpler. But whilst being simple, it also helped the black queen get into safety. Played rook f3. Maybe once again knight c2 was interesting. This is an approach which did not occur to me at all, but it has a point. For instance, you get some such position, and the black rook on g7, whilst covering the weaknesses, actually finds it very difficult to get into play. So the passivity of this rook on g7 could actually be a reason why it has a very decent compensation here. But as I said, this did not occur to me at all. Played rook f3. So in a way, this felt a bit easier for white to play compared to going rook f3 immediately. So I went rook f2, rook f3. Both of them felt like a tempo. But now the black queen gets into safety on a4. And the position becomes entirely unclear. So I played queen d2. Here once again, I was actually expecting black at some point to run with the king. So for instance, king d8 here, I thought would be quite logical. But the position does remain very complex because it's very difficult for black to coordinate properly. So not an easy thing to do. And also, almost in any position, b6 deserves very serious attention, because this square being taken, this knight on b3 becomes very passive. And something like this actually begins to look good for black, although white retains compensation almost in any endgame because the rook on g7 is so passive, something that did not really occur to me during the game. So this all was very interesting. Also, what my opponent did was actually quite crucial. Rook c4. Black is getting ready to attack this pawn on d4. King h1. I'm of course happy to get my king into safety before things will start happening. and knight c6. So all of these moves, they required some time from both of us. So we were slowly but steadily approaching the time trouble phase. And I sort of decided just to go for it. I played f5. It's not a bad decision, but it was not the only decision White had. White could consider developing the knight and protecting this pawn on d4. After which Black probably would have to basically just go for it. He is attacking the pawns on a2 and on d4. So after rook f1, you can take the either pawn. For instance, queen takes a2 is quite a possible move. And after f5, king d8, we basically go from a messy position into a messy position where anything is possible. But I just did not really think of this, and I was quite happy to really start an open fight after this kind of long and difficult maneuvering in the opening phase. So I went f5. It felt that, with the king safe on h1 and all my pieces ready for this, this breakthrough would give me chances, which is entirely correct, but it's not really easy for either side. So in this position, my opponent made, a mistake as far as the computer evaluation is concerned, but for a human purpose, his move was actually quite interesting. He played knight takes d4. Objectively, maybe e takes f5 was the only continuation. Queen takes h6 and knight d8. So this move, of course, defends against e6, protects the pawn on f7, and whilst the position remains very unclear, queen e3, as long as the black king is not, completely safe, White will retain compensation. Still, something like this feels like it could potentially get difficult for White to handle, as Black does have two very strong bishops, and still he is a pawn up, and White's attack is not really breaking through. So this could be a difficult test for me. But my opponent played knight takes d4, something that at least made me happy that I'll be rid of this knight on b3. Knight d4, rook d4, queen h6. And here an interesting position where my opponent actually started spending a long time thinking. And I expected him to play queen a6, simply to protect this pawn on e6. I did not really see what else Black can do. And after queen a6, we could get a remarkably complicated position after f6, rook g6, queen h7, and rook h4. I did see this position during the game, but I must confess I quite misevaluated the consequences. My intuition told me in this position quite correctly that White is doing well, but whilst he was thinking, I did not really try to find the best move. I thought, I'll let him think, maybe get into time trouble, and then we'll take it from there. In fact, this position is extremely complicated, and White has an only move to be better, and this move is an absolutely incredible rook f2, which I don't think I would have found, to be honest. Rook f2 has two purposes. One is to avoid a very unpleasant queen entry on e2, so to speak. For instance, if White goes g3, rook h5, queen e2, this queen could be extremely annoying there, and black gets all sorts of threats. So white can crumble here very easily, and above all needs to keep his king safe and everything under control. And this rook f2 works very nicely. White is threatening knight f3, and also giving the square e2 protection, and also in a way this rook helps in protecting the pawns on the king side. Of course, a very, very difficult thing to find. I think it is more realistic to expect of me that I would have found knight d3, which is, I think, a second best move. Queen c4, and this position gets very complicated with lines so difficult that I think you cannot expect human beings to really find them in real game conditions. So for instance, in a position like this, I was wondering about, during the game, I was wondering about some such positions. And my intuition was telling me, the knight on d3 protects my pawn, and I have two passed pawns potentially. I didn't see what black can do with my position. But in fact, after bishop c6, if you had to believe my computer, black is much, much better. I'm borderline winning. So somehow I underestimated the power of the queen in this position. So the position is simply too difficult for me to understand. So rook c1, of course, is a plausible move to find, attacking the queen. And now there is the following variation, which seems forced for both sides. And here rook c7, white amazingly starts playing for checkmate, and black finds the only way to stay alive. And this absolutely incredible variation leads to an unclear ending at the end. This is, of course, interesting only analytically. I don't think that me and my opponent, I don't think we would have ever found this variation, no matter how much time you give us. I just don't think it's really possible. But in the game, I think a bit unfortunately, this very interesting game came to quite an abrupt conclusion. My opponent, after thinking for a very long time and coming down to maybe 3 or 4 minutes, played rook g2. Not the move I reckoned with at all, because it looked impossible to me, and it is. I played bishop takes f7, and black resigned. So this sort of blind spots, they do happen. Black is getting mated after bishop f7, as you can easily discover for yourself. The variations are not really difficult. And after the game, I actually wondered what my opponent was thinking about, because I realized that he missed bishop f7. These things do happen, and I couldn't understand what he was calculating if he missed bishop f7. And he probably was thinking of the following. So there is this move queen f6. Maybe he thought this was my idea, after which black has rook takes h2, king h2, rook h4 check. And this very nice variation actually leads to winning position for black. So this must have been what my opponent calculated and was spinning his hopes on. And a bit unfortunately for him, he missed this simple check, and this game, as I said, came to an unfortunate end. But other than that, I thought this was a game full of contents and even of some theoretical value. And also, as I discovered when preparing this video, this position, I think, can be even used as an exercise for probably players of any level. I think you could give this position to a world champion, and I don't think he would have found it easy to come up with best moves. So quite a lot of contents in this game, quite a lot of, I think, theoretical importance too. I am sure that we'll see more of this line with knight b3 or with rook b1, and I'm quite curious to see the theoretical developments here. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this game, this variation, and I hope to see you. I hope to see you next time with some more games, some more videos for you. Thank you very much.